You are the CEO of Variety St. Louis.
We're a charity that's been around. We're now celebrating our 90th year, and we empower children with special needs. We were also well known for putting on big productions. We called it Dinner with the Stars. We brought in an A-list John Legend or Sting. We brought in an entertainer to have a big black tie gala. You need to actively go out and hire someone who has a disability. And you're gonna get someone who's a problem solver, someone who's adapting, because they do this every day. They have to solve millions of problems every day just to function. And so you're gonna get people who are great problem solvers, think outside the box. Whatever the cliches are gonna be, that's someone with a disability that faces these daily challenges.
Brian, thank you for making the time.
Well, you know, it's excited about the opportunity to sit down and have an in-depth conversation with you.
I'm looking forward to it. You are the CEO of Variety St. Louis, an organization that you've been with since 2010.
Correct.
And you've been leading since 2017.
That's correct.
Can you give myself and our listeners some background on Variety and what the organization does?
The Reader's Digest version is we're a charity that's been around. We're now celebrating our 90th year here in the community. And we empower children with special needs. And our way of empowering them is to provide them with the tools, which is often medical equipment or therapy, that they need to access the world on a daily basis. But we also provide experiences like camp and performing arts programs that allow kids to be kids and to socialize and gain self-confidence. And it's kind of that model of those two things together, those tools that they need and those experiences that they need to overcome the challenges of physical or developmental disabilities.
That's a phenomenal mission that Variety has. And I know from our brief interactions that you're a man with a heart of gold. So I would love to hear how you grew up and how you were kind of shaped or molded into the person you are today. Can you give us some background there?
Yeah, I think, born and raised here in St. Louis. And so I guess there's a Midwestern sense of community. I think when I think back of now as I've been involved in the St. Louis community, there's an ethos here that there's something about the betterment of the community and wanting to give back. But so my parents, I'm one of four boys. So my mom and dad had their hands full of raising myself and my three brothers. But I think we were raised like so many people in St. Louis, raised Catholic. I went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, and then went on to Catholic university. I think that forms a lot of who you are, less on the faith side, but probably more influenced on the community side. So if you think about who the families and the people you grow up around, they're usually associated with your parish growing up. In St. Louis, there's so many different parishes. And so those are the folks that you become friends with. And going off to high school, went down to St. Louis University High School in the city. And then off to college, it's more about that community, I think, that forms you. So I am one of three other brothers that I have. So I think that forms you, not having sisters growing up.
I would imagine with three brothers, there was a lot of rough play and sports.
Yes, absolutely. So there's lots of competitive, lots of that. We all took into rugby as we all played football, but rugby became a passion that we all still have today. So that community, I think, formed us. But there's something about not having sisters to maybe temper us a little bit or teach us that side of the world that forms you, certainly.
I don't have a lot of rugby exposure, but from what I've seen, it seems like a very dangerous sport. Like it seems like all of the most dangerous elements of every other sport combined.
It's interesting you say that, because the way we convinced our parents to play that was that, oddly enough, because you don't have the helmets or the gear, it's yourself, your cleats and your jersey, that it has less injury than football.
Wow.
It's more in line with soccer. Certainly a little bit more of the bumps and bruises and those types of things, but you're disincentivized when you don't have a helmet or shoulder pads like in football to tackle. It's more like wrestling. You don't, if you're going to tackle someone coming at you, you don't want to put your head in front of them. It's more like a wrestling takedown. So we convinced our parents to let us play by telling them that it was less dangerous than the football that they allowed us to play. So
that's a great point. I actually never thought of that.
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense. And today you're obviously still in St. Louis. Can you kind of speak to why you decided to stay in St. Louis? We hear of a lot of folks who were maybe raised in St. Louis, moved out for some time, came back, or moved out for some time, maybe didn't come back. And of course we hear from a lot of transplants. But for someone like yourself, born and raised here, still here, giving back to the community that you came up in, what kept you in St. Louis?
I think it's probably a lot, and it's interesting that you say that because that's been the reality. My three brothers don't live here. They moved out once school started college or after university. They've all since gone. And my wife Sarah is not from St. Louis. She came probably the early grade school, second or third grade. I think by that she moved to St. Louis, and so we certainly weren't tied down on her side of the family, being all over the place. I've always, there's a comfort certainly in the known. Through my work, I lived in Charlotte for a year, and I've lived in some other places temporarily. But I think there's the uniqueness of the community is always. There's a cliche of it's a great place to raise a family, and I think having a community, which I have three children, and for them to grow up, there was a comfort in, for me at least, in giving them the same experiences that I was so happy with, or so excited by, and had positive experiences. So you kind of wanted to give them something similar, and maybe I was risk averse, and like my brothers, wasn't able to or bold enough to say I'm going to pick up and move somewhere else. But my wife and I have been happy to stay here and build a group of friends and a network here.
For what it's worth, I agree that it's a very family-friendly city, a great place to raise your children.
Right.
You mentioned your work took you to Charlotte for some time. Was that nonprofit work, or were you always in the nonprofit world?
I didn't come to the nonprofit world until I came to Variety. So I was always in the sports and the entertainment world. The connecting force, I guess, is that Variety, in the roots of Variety, it was formed by theater owners. So it's been tied to the entertainment industry since its formation around the Great Depression in the 30s. And so it was first theater owners who started Variety up in Pittsburgh. So there's always been a tie to the movie and the entertainment and the music world. And I came up through sports marketing, got into more of the advertising and marketing agency work, and then got into the live music, a big company called Live Nation that owns and operates most of all the music venues and does all the tours, and they have kind of a monopoly or stranglehold on that entertainment industry. And I was working for Live Nation when I then made the switch. The CEO at the time of Variety I'd known for a lot of years, and she had always been talking about wanting to get someone over who was familiar with both the corporate world and the entertainment world, but to take Variety to the next level. So I'd been on the for-profit side my entire career until the last 13 years.
And when you say taking Variety to the next level, I would imagine a lot of that entails running it like a for-profit enterprise. Sure. You've been through, since your time with Variety, quite a few different stages, challenges, COVID being one of them.
Right.
Can you speak to some of the things you did in your early days as a leader, and then some of the challenges you experienced during COVID, for example?
Yeah, I think early on, I always say that being in both worlds, it seems like the nonprofit charity world is 5 to 10 years behind, what's going on in the business world. So when you think about the fundraising side of what we do, there's a good comparison to when I was with Live Nation. I was involved a lot in the corporate sponsorship world. So companies who wanted to put their names on the venue or to sponsor tours or get involved because it helped generate sales for them. If they could be associated with a tour or be associated with a venue, it helped drive sales. And the reasons folks used to sponsor those things, it first was just a brand. They wanted to get their name out. And so they'd throw banners up there and they'd want to have their name associated with something. And the trend started to be, well, you can't just do that anymore. You got to prove to us that you're moving the dial, that you're because you sponsor this venue or this tour, that you're actually generating new business, and the ROI is there, so that the sponsorship dollars justified that investment because of the sales that you received. There's a lot of similarities to where donations were. Companies used to want to just give money to a charity or an organization because it was the right thing to do. They felt good about it. It got their name associated with doing something that, benefited the community. And then companies went through that same transition of what they used to do with sponsorship, of thinking about their giving. And they started to look at that and say, well, are we making, we're giving this money to an organization. Are we getting a return on this? Or why are we associated with this particular organization and not another type of charity or another industry? And those same trends then followed, where you had to start on the development fundraising side. You had to justify why investing in an organization was making a difference. You had to track that. You had to track the impact. You had to show that the company's involvement with your organization was meaningful, but it also was meaningful to the employees. It helped them, the employees wanted to work for companies that were doing good. And so it started to change. They weren't just writing you a check anymore. They wanted to be invested in, are your programs making a difference? Do your values align with our values as a brand or a company? And then as companies did that, you started to see foundations and individual donors start to get more sophisticated in their giving. So those trends then followed to say, donors saying, I'm going to give you my money, but I'd like to see where it's going and how it's being used. And so that's maybe an example of how they mirror each other. I think the nonprofit industry maybe trails a little bit, but those pressures then ultimately fall on organizations as well. And so as any company does, we also then had to look at our programs and say, do we need to narrow what we're doing in our model to, one, be different? So we had to have some differentiation. We don't want to replicate what other folks are doing, but is our model working? Are we making a difference or an impact? And how do you measure that? And like any company does, and you look how you spend your money. And you got to be efficient with it. You want to be impactful with it. And so we had to take a look when I got into a COO role of really evaluating our programs and saying, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And we've narrowed, I guess, the model for us over these last 13 years. And
this might be a silly question, but when you say a program, are you referring to some of the things Variety is doing for children, or are you referring to, for example, fundraising events?
Yeah, and maybe the parlance is a little there. A program for us is a service. So when we think about a program, it's something we're doing to benefit the child. Okay. So in our Variety, for instance, we would say we have two core programs, which are the equipment and the therapy that we provide. And then we have two, what we would call our enrichment programs, which are our camp and our performing arts programs. So the programs for us are the services that we provide. So we're a service provider, and we're providing that directly to the child. We would think then from a fundraising standpoint or development standpoint, an event or a campaign would be how we would talk about when we're trying to raise dollars or raise the money.
And both the events and campaigns, aside from just the changing environment when it comes to fundraising, for example, but both of them were impacted by the COVID pandemic, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
So if you think about on the fundraising or the development side, as a charity that's so tied into the entertainment industry, we were also well known for putting on big productions. So we would put on we called it Dinner with the Stars. We brought in an A-list John Legend or Sting. We brought in an entertainer to have a big black tie gala. So we would have James Taylor or someone come in we would have this cocktail parties, and then we'd have a nice dinner, and then we'd have a program where we would highlight the kids. So we have a chorus and a dance group. They would perform. We would highlight a family that's receiving medical equipment, and we'd talk through that. We would do an appeal where we try and raise money, for the organization, and then we'd end with a big performance. And so we were known for putting on these big fundraisers. We also did a fashion show. So we, for a long time, had a fashion show that would bring in a big designer. And our take on that was to have our kids who use, the girls who use power wheelchairs. The designer would come in, and like Carmen Mark Volvo or someone would come in and do a couture dress for the girl. And they would run down the aisle in their power wheelchair. And instead of talking about the dress they were wearing, they were talking about this power wheelchair that they just got and all the features that it has. So their runway show was they're wearing a couture dress, but we're talking about the features of a power wheelchair that has a standing feature or has a full recline. And so we would do that and then have a full traditional with the models and a runway show, but we'd raise money. So those are all in-person events. They're big events. They take lots of time and expensive to produce, but lots of time to put on. And that's what we did, and that's where we raised most of our money. COVID comes, and you can't be in person. We're helping, and the kids who we serve were, immunocompromised and health compromised, and so the pandemic for them was more risky, because if you're already, having health issues, getting COVID could be fatal because you already had issues. So we had to be super careful with how we did our programs. But our main fundraising platforms were immediately canceled because you couldn't do them in person. So that started to make us rethink, how do you connect with donors if it's not at these big events, these big galas or fashion shows? How do you missionize a donor who's interested and used to coming to some big society event and get them connected? And so overnight, when COVID hit, those events got canceled. Mm-hmm. And we, like a lot of other organizations, had to stop and say, all right, what do we do? The dollars aren't going to be there unless we go get them differently.
So before we get into what you did,
right.
When you used to put on fundraising events like that, what did that return on investment typically look like? I'm sure it varied, but did you have a general target?
So and I guess we were able to put on such a big event and a high profile event because in our world, we had underwriting for that. And that's probably the toughest support or giving to get, is someone who's willing to, it's not super glamorous to say, I'm going to cover the cost to bring in that entertainer, and I'm going to cover the cost for the meal and the venue and the flowers and all of those things. And we were lucky to have a couple of individuals and who were dedicated to Variety and have been dedicated to Variety and were willing to invest. They also gave to our programs, but they realized the benefit of having a high-profile event that attracted a lot of the folks who had the capacity to give. And it was something, with all the charities that are out there and the organizations that are out there, it was a way to separate us and differentiate us. And so if you're trying to get all those big donors to come to an event, and they can come to an event every night of the week if they wanted to, and every weekend for sure, you wanted yours to be the one. And our donors realized that. So the P&L on an event like that, ours was a little bit skewed because we didn't, all of the money that we raised, and over the course of these two events, we would probably raise a couple $1 million. And that was all free and clear of any costs. So because we had the event cost underwritten. So and that's actually, it's good they asked that question, because once we stopped doing that, we had the conversation with those donors to say we'd rather just give our money. Now that we went on a journey with them to say we'd rather just give our dollars to the organization, to the program, and we don't want to underwrite anymore. Once we were clear of, well, I guess quote unquote clear, in the post-COVID new reality, we decided not to go back to those events because of the time and energy they took. It almost wouldn't pencil out. to have a big event like that. So we had to rethink, is the investment of time and energy and dollars worth the return? Can you raise 30% more, and have a profit margin of 30 or 40 or 50% on an event like that, with the costs, to rent a venue, to bring in an artist, to have those meals and do all those things. And so we decided not to. But it's a consideration for sure.
And when you decided not to, what was the ultimate strategy that you're employing today?
Yeah, and so part of it was, that's where we needed to be. It's also COVID changed the donors' willingness. They got used to going. They were used to going to these events all the time, and then COVID hit, and I think a lot of donors really liked not having to go to these things anymore. And so we heard post-COVID, after a couple of years of not having them, from donors who said, we're not interested. If you have it, we're probably not going to come back. Or if our company normally gets a table, or our foundation gets a table, we're having trouble filling them. And so we don't want to do that anymore. We'd like to engage with you differently. And I think for us at Variety, one of the key learnings that we had when this happened, we certainly had our core donors who were with us no matter what. And so when they realized that we weren't going to have our big fundraisers, they said, you can still count on us. We're still giving you the support. We'll give you maybe a little bit extra support because we know it's a challenging environment. But we learned that we had a lot of folks who it was transactional. They would come to this event. They would give a $5,000 or a $10,000 gift, which, in our world, that's a material gift. And if someone's giving you $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000, you think, man, they are missionized. They are with us. They believe in what we're doing. And when the events were canceled and we called those folks up, we found out that it was more transactional. They're like, well, you're not going to have the event, so we're going to send our money somewhere else, or we're not really. We loved going there, and when we go, we'll give. But if we're not going, we're not going to give. And so that caused us to reflect a little bit and say, well, is this the best way to connect with these donors and for them to understand the mission and understand what we're doing for these kids? And is there maybe a better way that we can missionize someone by realizing the impact that a power wheelchair, or that braces, or a communication device, or speech therapy or physical therapy, or getting to go to a week at camp is having, and how transformational that is? We got to connect with these donors differently. So we started the last couple of years to do an event, one where we brought in a celebrity or a performer who had a disability. So we, for the last two years, brought in someone who, Mandy Harvey was last year, and Mandy was someone who gained some fame on America's Got Talent. She was a Golden Buzzer winner. She went profoundly deaf while she was in college on a scholarship for performing arts, for vocal. Wow. And she became hearing impaired and lost her hearing. And for a couple of years, never sang again, and then found out that, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try and figure out, I don't want to lose my voice. I think I still can do this. And so she started to perform and sing again and trust her voice. And she has this unbelievable singing voice, and she figured out how to do that and overcome that. And so Mandy came and performed with us, and then performed with our kids. Our chorus and dance performed with her, and that was the show. We also had Ali Stroker the year before. Ali's a Broadway star who won a Tony Award, and she uses a wheelchair. She was the first person who uses a wheelchair to win a Tony Award. So we thought, let's connect these dots a little bit more and showcase what these kids can do if given the chance. And so the program turned from having a high-profile A-list celebrity come in to having someone who's been successful, but also then is proof of what happens when you give these kids an opportunity. So we called it Variety Unbound was the event. And that was a different way to connect and missionize. But I think what we're ultimately going to do in the long term is really have more intimate opportunities for the families and the kids to connect with the donors. So when you hear parents tell the stories about the impact and the change that has happened, that's much more impactful than putting on a dinner, or putting on a show or a performance. So having testimonials from parents where you could gather 50 or 100 potential donors, that's going to be probably the future of being able to share and let them connect with the kids and the mission.
I think the pivot from pre-COVID to post-COVID was brilliant.
Right.
And it's a move that it's not entirely different than what you were doing before, but those relatively minor changes, I think, make a huge impact. And like you kind of touched on, bring in, I don't want to say the right donor, but the donor that's maybe more in line with what Variety's doing.
Right.
One of your 4 programs is the arts theater program.
Right.
And is that entirely focused on that one performance for the year, or are the kids also doing other performances throughout the year? Yeah,
for our performing arts, there's kind of 3 legs to it. One is the theater, and we have, post COVID, we used to put on a big Broadway production at the Two Hill Performing Arts Center, which is on UMSL's campus. And we put on this magnificent Broadway level. I mean, this thing could have toured, and it had massive sets, a full orchestra, all the lighting and designing. And we had Larry Teeter, who's been our director since the inception, who runs Webster Conservatory's performing arts. That was a big production that we used to do pre-COVID, and the kids built up to that, and there was 2 weekends of performances, so maybe they did 10 shows, and that was amazing. We would have kids with disabilities and kids without disabilities, kids who were just theater kids who performed, and then we'd have equity adult actors who performed. So it was this really magical kind of first in the nation model. What we realized once that got canceled the issues with that big production was we could only have about 20 kids who are Variety kids perform, because physically on a stage, to have 20 kids with, that use walkers or have mobility issues or maybe have sensory issues, that's a little bit overwhelming. So if we could have about 20 Variety kids perform, and then maybe have 10 or 15 kids who are backstage learning stagecraft, learning choreography or lights. Let's say you had 35 kids that were involved in benefiting from that program. Well, once we canceled those, we had a time to reflect and say, well, if we want to scale this thing up, we can't afford to put on major productions. We can't do 4 or 5 of these a year. So can we rethink this a little bit on how do we get, instead of 35 kids, how do we get 70 or 100 kids involved? And so we're changing, having to rethink that. And now we're gonna coming up in the end of the summer, early fall, we're gonna be partnering. Collaboration was the solution there. Instead of having to go rent a venue, we're going to go find COCA, which is an organization, a great performing arts organization. We're going to partner with them and put on a production. They'll bring the COCA kids and all of the experts that they have, combined with Variety's production and theater team, and put on a show. And we can have a lot more kids participate in that, and we can do several of those a year, which will be nice. Are the other 2 parts of the performing arts are the chorus and dance, and those run really the school year. So those are programs that run throughout the school year, and they'll do several productions and performances over the course of the year. So that's probably more frequent, where they can do each quarter they can have a showcase. We'll do a holiday show that we did just coming off of the holiday season, and we'll do another performance in the spring. So they're able to build up towards something and do 3 or 4 a year, sometimes even more than that. So that's exciting and a great opportunity for them.
I hope to get an invite to one of these performances.
Absolutely.
They sound amazing.
They are. They absolutely. They're inspiring for sure.
Yeah, I bet. So with your pivot after pivot after pivot, the pattern that I'm seeing is you are very serious as an organization about thinking about the business of charity and operating like a true, I don't want to say a true for-profit company would, but just like a professional outfit.
Absolutely, it has to be, yeah. And I think gone are the days where not that wasn't happening before, but that can't happen in today's environment. We deal with the same thing that any business, concentration risk. When you think of your donor base, we've seen a change. We used to, we're in our 90th year, and being here that long, you build up a base of support. But we made the shift probably 6 or 7 years ago. We were primarily civic progress, more heavily corporately funded. And as the landscape was changing, over the last decade here in St. Louis, companies were getting bought out, companies were merging, companies' headquarters were moving out of St. Louis, and so it might be regional headquarters is left here. There was some risk, and if we didn't develop the individual and the foundation support that we could get, that was really some institutional risk to the organization. So we had to make an effort probably 7 years ago to say we really need to build up this side of instead of just the corporations, we need to build up the individual and foundation giving because we had some concentration risk. And thankfully we did, because we've had a lot of change, just over those 7 years. And we've completely flipped, where if the individuals and the foundations have replaced the money, the level of giving, and surpassed the level of giving that we get from corporates, just because the landscape has changed. We still have some unbelievable corporate partners who have been with us for decades, but we have fewer of them because they've gone away.
So here at Storyboard, for example, we don't do any third-party property management. But if we were to do third-party property management, we probably wouldn't want to bring on an owner client that has, let's say, 90% of our total portfolio that we're managing.
Right.
Because the risk would be they may switch companies or they may sell. So if I understand correctly on your end, the risk with a big corporate donor is if 1 year they decide they're no longer going to donate as much or at all, you can't fund your programs. But would you turn someone down would you turn a large corporation down if tomorrow they say they'll write you a check that's equal to all of your current year's donations or something?
No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely not. I think the decision would be, or how we would evaluate that. One, we wouldn't turn them down because, in our world, we have wait lists for, there is more demand for our services than we are able to fund. So we have wait lists for medical equipment, or wait lists for people who need therapy services that they can't afford, or we have wait lists for, we can only have so many people come to camp, and so we need to serve those folks. I think the calculation would be, when I look at our programs, a couple of our programs, the equipment and the therapy program, those are ones that we're able to ramp up faster and more quickly than the others because of the infrastructure that's required internally, the staff that's required. You're adding caseloads on staff, but you can, with adding one new staff person, you can add 30 or 40 new kids that they serve. So if we were to get a gift like that, the evaluation, I think, would be, well, what's the internal investment that we need to provide services at this level? So if we got that gift, it might be adding just a couple of people internally to serve more kids, where if we were to ramp up and use that money to support our camp or performing arts, that's a little bit more labor intensive internally with staff that we would need to do that, and that takes more time. And so an investment there, you're committing more dollars. So if we were to grow the camp and add more weeks of camp or more venues that we provide the camp at, that's an investment you're committing those dollars. And so that would be harder to commit those dollars there if they were less certain that they were going to come back. So that's probably the way we'd approach that, or have to look at that.
And is there any scenario where, if you were to beat your revenue projections or targets, so the number of donations coming in, is there any scenario where maybe you look to park those funds somewhere to fund future year activities?
Yeah, and we as an organization, to kind of smooth out the rough years and the cyclical nature of some things, we made, and this predated me. So if I've been there 13 years, this was probably a few years before that. We decided to form an endowment and to have an endowment that we could build up over the course of time, that we can take distributions from each year. to supplement, the variations in giving. So at least at Variety, what we decided to do to start funding that was any bequests that we got. But so if people would leave and were kind enough to leave money to us in their will or their estate, we used those gifts, not operationally for that year, but to build up an endowment. And so now we've built up an endowment that we can take a distribution. We have a certain percentage that we can only take up to, but as a course of a practice, we'll take a distribution each year from the endowments that we have to help supplement those fluctuations. And so that gave us a stability, from if you're looking at the balance sheet and having assets that we can count on. If just like in every business, you look at cash flows and how many days of when we look at the number of days that we could function if everything were to be turned off, at any one point in time. So we try and keep, to want to have at least 6 months in cash at any point in time. So if another pandemic comes and everything turns off or something catastrophic happens, that we're able to continue to serve the families.
Doing good for society seems like it's a lot more complicated than an outsider may think.
Right. Yeah, and the paradox sometimes is, man, I'd love to not even have to be in business or not have to exist. It would be fantastic if parents could get the resources they need for their kids and there wasn't a need for a private charity to do that. So could you ever work yourself out of a job? That would be the happiest day of my life if I could say, we're done. We don't need to be around anymore. I'll move on to something else. But
that's a great way of putting it. And my understanding is that there's always more of a need than you can supply or provide for. And do you have any numbers to where, maybe what the need is and where you currently are?
Yeah, so I can kind of give you examples, but kind of by programs. If you think about medical equipment and what we talk about pre and post COVID, the one thing that I think the pandemic did as well. So we serve with the equipment and the therapy. We serve families. If you make $85,000 or less, you automatically qualify for our services. If you make more than that, we certainly still help those families, but there's a little bit more of an evaluation of demonstrating need that happens. And we certainly go well above $85,000 because of the expenses to have a child with a disability. The average is about $20,000 or $30,000 a year. So not a lot of families can afford all the costs. What COVID did and the economic turmoil that happened through COVID, there were a lot of families who were teetering. And so they weren't coming to us for help because they were just getting by. And when COVID happened, that tipped the scales for them. And so we saw an explosion of demand that we at first thought was a little bit, there was some noise in there as far as this record demand that we're getting. I think it's going to be temporary. And it hasn't stopped. So I think for us that the families are going to take a lot longer to try and recover and get back to where they were. So it's the extra need or the record demand is continuing, and COVID certainly had something to do with that. The dynamics of the families, where if you think about insurance, everyone deals with this, where your out of pockets and your copays are going up, and what's covered is decreasing. Well, that dynamic then flips a lot of families over to they were teetering and now they just can't afford it. So that record demand will continue. If I look, we're just talking with my programs team a couple of days ago about this. We have about $500,000 worth of requests for medical equipment that's on a wait list right now. So that's pretty extraordinary. We probably have for our therapy program, we have about $150,000 of requests for therapy services that are on a wait list right now. So we're trying to attack that, but that's a growing kind of list. And then when we think about our camp program, for example, we had about 80 kids last year who applied to come to our camp and weren't able to because we didn't have the physical capacity to accommodate them. We can handle about 70 or 80 kids a week in our summer camp, and we do in the summer we'll do 6 weeks of camp, and then we do 1 week of camp in the winter, and we still had about 70 kids that we couldn't find a space for. So that maybe gives you a sense of demand that's out there, the need. We know that, as I mentioned earlier, we serve 30 counties. So we serve 15 on the Missouri side and 15 on the Southern Illinois side. And we've got about 1,400 families that are active in our programs or enrolled with Variety. And to give you some perspective, there's probably, I would say, 30,000 kids within those 30 counties, maybe 35,000 kids in those counties that have a disability. Not all of them need our services, but that gives you a scale of the potential demand that's out there. If we're helping 1,400 kids and there's a population of 30,000 plus, and like I said, they don't all need Variety's help, but there's a lot out there, a lot of kids out there that deserve every bit of all these resources that they can get.
You're one of the, I guess any nonprofit for the most part, you're kind of those rare organizations where you don't want to see demand for your product.
Right, exactly.
And you're also in like a very interesting space to where you're seeing what the more privileged side of society is able to give.
Right.
And then you're seeing what the more vulnerable side of society needs. So with that in mind, do you think you're seeing leading or lagging indicators to where we are in an economic cycle as well? Like, for example, if we're entering a recession, are you seeing those donations drop off and the demand increase before we enter a recession or anything like that?
And that's been an interesting, because we've certainly gone through cycles of, you think of 2008, pre-pandemic, where we've gone through the economic big down, the Great Recessions, not the Depression. The Depression is why we were formed in the 30s, but we've gone through those cycles. There's a core group of folks who certainly giving is a part of their, they have the ability to give, and they're going to give regardless of the stock market or how their portfolio is doing, and what their wealth is, maybe their paper wealth. They're giving because they want to make a difference, and they're invested in that. And so we don't see as much on probably some of the larger donors of that coming into play, because probably they're not as affected, by those cyclical downturns. But it's also maybe that's something that they're invested in giving. So there's some effects, I think, when there are economic downturns. I really think when that happens, though, if you want to call them regular donors, right? I think another reason we don't see a lot of the fluctuation is because when that happens, that hyper focuses people on the needs out there. So when there's those stressors that happen, I think people and their good nature, and especially here in the Midwest, people react to that and still give, even when maybe that times are a little tougher. We're blessed with folks who still want to give. And then maybe it's a little bit more focused on that it's an urgent need, and they're going to react to it. So it becomes a little less impacted by those, because it's like when there's a catastrophe, right? People react and they're going to go to basic human needs, and they want to step in and help, and so they're gonna step in and help regardless if it makes them watch their wallet a little bit more closely, their expenses a little more closely. They've got a strong belief in the goodness of people to want to help when they can. So I don't know if that answers your question. But
it does. I mean, I didn't think you'd have any hard data on it, or it's something that's really that you think about a lot. But that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
You did mention the goodness of people, though.
Right.
So when you're building Variety, when you're building out the team, or if you have some turnover, you're onboarding someone,
right.
I'm sure there has to be a major component in that person or the members of your team to where they're really mission driven.
Sure.
They're not necessarily motivated by higher salaries.
Right.
I'm sure they can get a higher salary in the for-profit world.
Absolutely.
I would imagine.
Right.
So what are some of the things you do when it comes to ensuring you're bringing on the right people and instilling your core values, Variety's core values, and just building that culture that you want to see in the organization?
Yeah, and that's certainly we're not immune, especially more recently with the pressures that happened. I think we're a little bit of if you talk about lagging indicators, we weren't with the higher cost of with inflation and cost of living and those pressures that maybe hit us a little bit later on the upward pressures on salaries and costs. But we're certainly the folks who are going to be attracted to coming to us absolutely aren't doing it for the money. So they need fair, competitive salaries and benefits and stuff like that. But I think they all realize in the for-profit world they could be making more money. So there is a sense of wanting to work at a place that is driven by vision and values and mission. And so that may be one point of differentiation between, I know a lot of companies, that's important, but that may not be the driver. For us, we're getting people who are, that's what motivates them. So I always tell people that we're talking to potential candidates, I need a group of people who are unsettled by the fact there's waitlist and there's that need. That needs to be your motivator to say, I can't stand by and see that there's a wait list for this. I need people that are unsettled. So we certainly use the tools that are the assessments and the evaluations that are available to for-profit companies when we try and find those folks that will fit, that have the work styles and have the aptitude and have the drivers that will mold well with the team. And so we use those when we do in the assessment process. But we are looking for folks that's their motivator, their driver. They're not driven by needing needing the compensation that's going to be available in the for-profit world and not the nonprofit world. Folks that are okay with change, so as we're an ever-changing environment, so they have to be able to adapt to that. And so we are not against finding people that, like myself, who come with no experience in the nonprofit world, but that have a set of core skills that will adapt well and will serve them well when they come over to our side.
What types of metrics or data would you say you measure in the organization? Because it's one thing to have those folks that you just mentioned that are for the mission, unsettled by this need in our society, but bringing them together and really focusing their energy on what Variety needs to do or accomplish is an entirely different task, I would imagine. So how are you using metrics?
Interesting. We just had a session with Jonathan 2 days ago with the whole staff. So we did both the predictive index and the strength finders assessments.
He's never offered that to me.
So now you can actually go to him and say, hey, I heard that you did this for Variety. So we just did a session on Wednesday where we had everyone do the predictive index and we had everyone do strength finders. And we spent an hour and a half going through where the entire staff, the makeup of the staff was, and where it goes back to the research that shows you if you are trying to grow and enhance the strengths that people have versus trying to fix the weaknesses they have, you're going to have a much more engaged workforce. So if you can celebrate the strengths and build on those strengths and then, find the things that you don't like to do, there's going to be someone in the company who really likes to do those things. So do the things you love and do more of it, and then find the things that you hate doing and find out who might love doing that. And so we're going to use those assessments to make sure that the responsibilities and the roles that we have and the way we delegate all of those responsibilities align well with folks' strength. So that's been it's been an interesting. I don't think anyone was surprised when we did those assessments. Most people thought it was pretty right on, and as far as finding out where their strengths were, but. I don't know if that answers the question on what are the core, I guess.
Well, it answers one question,
Right.
which is how you're mobilizing your team.
Right.
In terms of other metrics, what's important for you to measure? We talked about donations.
Right.
What else are you kind of keeping an eye on, or what's on your dashboard?
So I think if we think about on the programs, the assessments that we started actually 6 years ago, one of the things that we stepped back to try and answer the question of what's the impact, how do you quantify the impact that we're making on these kids? And we did an evaluation, said if we look at these programs that we do, our core programs and our enrichment programs, what are the universal areas that we're making change or that we want to make change? And maybe we're not making change in there now, but we need to. And we really narrowed in to say, if we're going to measure programs, the 4 areas that we're going to start to assess and track are the effects that it has on independence, skills, socialization, and self-esteem. So those 4 impact areas and focus areas are universal across the programs that we do. And so we're going to start to assess. And so we actually brought in a group to say, how do we formulate assessments and surveys, assessments that are done by professionals, therapists, or our camp staff, or our programs team, and assessments that also the parents are doing, or the parents are doing with their child. How can we develop some assessments that they can take? They receive the services that we get, and then let's track that. And so now we're working into 6 years of having data to say, as a baseline, we want to have 80% of the kids who participate in a program report improvement in those 4 focus areas. So we can look at it by program, and we can look at it collectively as an organization. And what we found now that we've done it for 6 years, thankfully, and because of the hard work of the programs team, we're above 80% on all of those 4 focus areas. The hardest one is independence. So the one that scores probably the lowest, I think last year was 83%, is independence. And that's probably the hardest to affect. And that's a longer term kind of impact. And so we are trying to look on how we improve that, but we know we're meeting our baseline, but we're trying to exceed it. So those are metrics we think about and evaluate the programs, and making sure, all right, if this program isn't having the necessary impact we want, why is it successful in this other program? So we can compare across programs. The things we track on the development side are not only donations, but some of the things that we track are renewal rates. So donor renewal rates, or donor retention rates, donor acquisition rates. We also look at, like anyone would look on sales, kind of the growth. What are you able to do with existing donors, and how are you able to grow them? So there's probably 6 or 7 metrics on the development team that they're tracking, in addition to the budgets that we have, but looking at, are we retaining the donors that we work hard to get? So where are the retention rates? Where's the new acquisition? So we have targets for each of those, or percentages. And to reach the budget this year, we're going to have to acquire X number of donors at these different levels, and be able to then retain the ones we have at the different levels. And it changes by level on the retention rates, or the renewal rates. We track recapture rates. So if we have donors who have not given to us in a year, or 18 months, or back to 36 months, we look at, can we go after that group and recapture and bring them back into the fold? And so the development team tracks those as a way to get to budget. So we've got pretty good metrics and a pretty good history of, all right, to reach the budget this year, this is where we're going to need to be. And then I think maybe as an organization, I look at, as we think about how we spend the dollars, the cost per child and the cost per unit of service we deliver are super meaningful. So if you think about a cost per unit of service, for us, a unit of service might be a piece of equipment. or it's going to be an hour of service. So if they're getting an hour of therapy, or they're getting an hour of camp, or they're getting an hour of participation in the performing arts programs, we evaluate the cost per hour or per unit of service, and then collectively the cost per child. And obviously the programs differ on what those costs per unit or those costs per child are, but that helps with a finite number of dollars that we have. You got to judge and decide where to spend it. And so looking at those and being aware of those and tracking those is meaningful. I don't know if that's too inside baseball or not, but
that was amazing.
Right.
I was just trying my best not to cut you off with like a wow or a thanks for sharing, because that's very helpful. And I've personally never truly thought about the business behind any charitable organization, but I would imagine that not every charity is run like Variety. I really, really appreciate the way you run the organization, and the fact that you really, truly are, as you just went over in depth, running it like a business, which is the way to go when you're dealing with finite funds and you're trying to obtain more funds to deploy.
And I think there's the landscape and the environment is more competitive. There's a couple statistics on the number of nonprofits that get certified and get their 501c certification every month, and every year. And so the landscape, there's more, there's not less nonprofits out there, there's more. And so you have to differentiate yourself and say, we're well run, established, we are good stewards of the dollars that you're going to entrust with us. So you have to, and you're talking to business folks. And so the people that are donating to you do this for a living, and do this for their own companies, so that you're speaking their language when you say, and can share the metrics and the focus and what you're trying to do to maximize the dollar. And so that has to happen. And there are certainly organizations out there that have built up. Charity Navigator is one of them, but there's now some tools that are third-party independent tools that donors can look to and say, okay, does Variety have the highest levels 4-star? So we have a 4-star designation. So that means that we're well run, and they look at all the different metrics and say that you can give with confidence. So there's some third-party folks that we certainly pay attention to and make sure that we celebrate when we have when we've been able to showcase that we're a trusted organization.
That's good to know. I didn't know that there were third parties like that. What was the name of that again?
It's called Charity Navigator.
Charity Navigator.
And that's probably the largest and most well-respected of those. And so they evolve, right? So it used to be just that they would look at the financials of an organization. And they started a thing a couple of years ago to say, well, that's part of the picture, but how do we assess and how do we apply some metrics to the impact and track the impact? And so they've now, over the last couple of years, started to have impact scores that go into their overall evaluation. So they, for example, look at our medical equipment program and say, all right, is that doing what they say they're going to do? And is it that, as we dig into the program, is that affecting change? And let's grade that. Let's figure out a system to do that and be able to report that out. So that's a good tool for donors to have confidence and to evaluate when there's so many out there, so many different options out there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. We like to end each show with what we call a hole-in-one, which is just your greatest piece of advice that someone can implement into either their life or organization today. You've already shared a lot, but do you have anything left?
I think from us, and we had this question kind of come up when we've always had our mission, right? And we think about our mission, but we never had a vision statement before a couple of years ago. And we were challenging ourselves, and myself included, and I challenged the staff to say, ultimately, why are we doing this, and what bigger picture are we trying to change? And we landed on our vision of a world where we've redefined ability and reimagined possibility for the kids that we serve. And what that means is that disability has a negative connotation just in the nature of the breakdown of the word. But so redefine ability. Ability isn't something that our kids can't do. It's our kids do differently, or they need some extra tools to be able to do it. They're still able to do things. They're just going to do them differently. So if we can get the world thinking differently about this isn't a negative, this is a positive. Then if we could redefine that word, then that kind of reimagines for them what's possible. And that changes the expectations they have for themselves, but also the community changes their expectations, what they have for the children. And so as we think about that vision, the one thing I would challenge, I think, is in today's day and age, and you hear about it every day on the news, everyone talks about staffing, how hard it is to hire and get staff shortages, and they're talking about with the retirement, all of the looming, the boomer generations retiring, and there's not going to be enough people to work at your company. And we're over here raising our hand and saying, well, unemployment might be at a record low, but it's not at a record low for folks with disabilities. That's still always a fundamentally and materially larger number. The unemployment rate for people with disabilities. And so the challenge I would have people think about is you need to actively go out and hire someone, who has a disability. And you're going to get someone who's a problem solver, someone who's adapting, because they do this every day. They have to solve millions of problems every day just to function. And so you're going to get people who are great problem solvers, think outside the box, whatever the cliches are going to be. That's someone with a disability that faces these daily challenges. And oh, by the way, my experience has been you're never going to meet a more optimistic person in your life than someone who chooses happiness, chooses to be happy despite the challenges that they have. And so talk about an inspirational person to have on your team. That's going to be someone with special needs. So I think for me, the challenge would be create that environment and purposely go out and try and find and hire someone. It's going to make you a better company. It's going to make your employees better. And it's going to, I think, improve the society and the community overall.
That's a great point, one that I personally have never thought of.
Right.
So I appreciate you sharing.
Right.
I think that was extremely impactful, and I agree with everything you just said there. It's like you said, someone who is problem solving literally every single day.
Once I get out of bed.
Yeah, multiple times a day. So great point. Thank you for sharing. Where can parents or donors, potential donors, learn more about Variety?
I would direct everyone to VarietyStl.org. That's our website. That's going to give for folks out there who need help. I would say the earlier the better. We want to help kids from when they're born until they turn 21. And so as soon as you're starting to face these challenges, you may not need our help right now, but you're going to benefit from our help sooner than later. So get involved, apply, just get enrolled with Variety and be aware of the services we provide. And then we don't exist without the generosity of the community. So there's multiple places on there where we make it easy to donate if you feel so inspired to give us a donation. Know that's going to make a huge impact. So VarietyStl.org.
We will link that in the show notes. Brian, thanks for your time. I enjoyed the conversation.
All right, Raj, appreciate the opportunity. This is a great platform to have, as we were talking earlier, kind of a long-form discussion on some heavy topics.
Thank you.
Absolutely.